Minister, I listened to the debate last night, and I think many of the other colleagues laid out a lot of the gaps and issues with the bill, so I'm certainly not going to repeat some of those points, but I did want to take some time to maybe put in context why data protection and privacy are such important matters and why the GDPR is such a significant regulation that we all have to pay enormous attention to. I think when you talk about data protection, it can be hard sometimes to explain the significance of it to people. Some people have just a kind of a gut aversion to data being hoovered up and their privacy being invaded. Other people have the attitude, sure, I shall look at it, if you've nothing to hide, what are you worried about? And other people really don't care or haven't paid enough attention to the issue. So I think it's important for us to outline why data protection is important and what the real-world implications are of your private data not being protected. And I think last year in the US, data on 143 million Americans was stolen from a credit check company, Equifax, and this was data like dates of birth, social security numbers, bank account numbers, driver's licence and so on. And the hackers got in through a very simple web act, through the side door using the app. It wasn't really Fort Knox, wasn't difficulty, but the problems that caused for individuals was absolutely immense. With one case of one woman whose identity was stolen 15 times, her credit ratings were wrecked, she couldn't get a mortgage, hours spent trying to untangle herself from this, and not only people who had dealings with this company, but every person in the United States who'd taken out a loan in the previous few years had their data stolen because of the sharing of information. So I think that does give us a good example to show the importance of the principles underlying the GDPR. Firstly, why data has to be kept secure, why the principle of only collecting the minimum amount of data necessary for a particular purpose is a basic principle of data protection. Thirdly, how easy it can be for your data to be stolen if it's being shared around. Fourthly, the major consequences of losing control of your data, and I suppose lastly the fact that it's possible for companies and organisations you've never heard of to have huge wads of information about you. And you know, let's imagine a world where most, if not all, of your daily activities were constantly monitored and evaluated, what you buy at the shops and online, where you are at any given time, who your friends are, how you interact with them, how many hours you spend watching TV, what you read, what you skip past when you're reading, how you sleep, what bills and taxes you pay. That's actually the world that we live in now, thanks to organisations like Google, Facebook, Instagram, and then the health tracking apps like Fitbit. Now, add on to that a system where these activities and behaviours are rated as either positive or negative and distilled into a single number or score according to the rules set by the government. A system that creates your citizen score that tells everyone whether or not you're trustworthy. Your rating is publicly ranked against that of the entire population and used to determine your eligibility for a mortgage or a job, where your children can go to school, how much you pay for flights, even whether you're allowed to take the train or taxi journeys. Again, we don't have to imagine this. This is happening right now in China. There, the government is developing a social credit system to trust the trustworthiness of its 1.3 billion citizens. For now, such a scheme is voluntary, but by 2020 this scheme is going to be mandatory, and the behaviour of every single citizen in China is going to be rated and ranked, whether they like it or not. That's the world that we live in now, sadly, where, if you like, surveillance of our every move, our every desire, our every thought nearly is visible to some kind of a private company. Put all that data together with a government that has a big interest in controlling its citizens, and you have China's social credit score. There's no escape and there's no opt-out. If you not opt out, you get a low score, so that means no job for you, no mortgage, no travel, no education. Now, We have, I suppose, the beginnings of that here with employers looking at Facebook profiles. We see landlords trailing and trawling through Twitter feeds. So in that sense, it's not a huge leap from that to the situation in China. And I think that's the backdrop to which this discussion takes place. I think it's enormously important, and we all have to, I suppose, not just as TDs, but as citizens generally on the outside, wake up to this issue, because the technical ability to implement full-scale 24-hour surveillance on every citizen in Europe and Ireland, and in fact in most of the world, is actually in place and there right now. Many of us have actually, I suppose, for years willingly signed up to this 24-hour surveillance of a smaller or larger part of our lives by various private companies that in many cases know as much, if not more, about us than we actually do ourselves. So I think that's why the GDPR is very important. We've become, I think, anaesthetised really to giving up our data to private companies to manipulate and profit from. 22 years ago, in 1996, for example, the hugely, I'd have to say, underrated Silicon Valley commentator Paulina Borsuk was warning about the dangers of corporate America's hunger to exploit our data for profit. I think we could and should have done something about all of this 10 years ago. We should have done something about it actually 15 years ago, but I suppose it's, better late than never. But we really do have to look at the devil in the detail, and whether the GDPR goes far enough to protect us really is a very open question, as many people have pointed out, and I have to say I would generally side with those people. I think there are dangers there in that it doesn't actually go far enough. I think, if we look at the bill that's before us, and obviously we're going to deal with this in a lot more detail later on, the Justice Committee has prioritised this and has said we'll sit for however long it takes to get this through committee stage, to make it fit for purpose within the deadline that the government has set, that we have to be signed up and have it enacted by. But I'd have to say, looking at the bill, that it's very clear that the government has set out really a path of grabbing for itself the absolute maximum flexibility to maintain, as far as possible, the privacy-compromising status quo. And I think that's not a surprise when it comes to data protection. It's very hard to take the Irish state as an honest broker in that situation. You only have to look at Public Services Card, individual health identifiers, the CCTV projects in Limerick, the wide-ranging Garda surveillance power, the wide-ranging Garda powers to access phone records, a data retention regime which, according to a former Chief Justice, amounts to mass surveillance of the entire population of the state. And we've seen an awful lot of intransigence, of carelessness and intrusiveness actually from the state, if you like, a sort of, in many aspects, really a willful disregard for what is people's fundamental right to privacy. I think we have to take cognizance that that's the backdrop. Let's look at the individual health identifiers project, a project that's steaming ahead regardless, despite the fact that it's on a very, very shaky legislative foundation. There's minimal public knowledge and understanding of it, about what it's about, let alone people actually consenting to be part of it. And while there may well be very legitimate reasons for creating databases which can contribute to public safety and to public health, there has to be a level of trust and understanding there, and I think complete clarity on what the databases will be used for and what they won't be used for, how people can opt in, how they can opt out. We don't know any of that in regard to this project. I think last summer, solicitor and data expert Simon McGarr told the Justice Committee that it's very likely, following the Barra judgment, that the Health Identifiers Act doesn't in fact even comply with European law, something that would open the state up to damages claims from every person in the database, which is actually every person in the state. And as I said, we've no real idea even what's going on with that database. All we do know is that it is rolling on, and the HSE's interim chief Information Officer was giddily, I suppose, telling Silicon Republic about the possibility of something like Apple Watch being linked to your electronic health records as a mechanism of patient empowerment. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. Empowerment was one of the buzzwords used by Google and Facebook in the early days, and look where that all ended up. So, you know, it's actually not a stretch to imagine a time where your information on your blood pressure, your heart rate, your sleep patterns, your blood alcohol level is fed into something like an Apple Watch to health insurers, who will then charge you higher premiums to people who aren't living right or behaving properly, with the upshot that the unhealthy will be probably cut off from healthcare in its entirety. And I suppose, as the HSE CIO said, it's not science fiction anymore. It certainly isn't. I think with the health identifiers, as with the PSC, despite their blatant illegality, well, you see, I had to speak a little bit longer when the Deputy wasn't present, so now I need to finish my points because I didn't want the debate to run out. I think, as TJ McIntyre said about the public services card, it's not an aberration, but exemplifies a systematic disregard for privacy and data protection throughout this state. And I do think it's instructive to note that sections 115 and 126 of the bill, that the government hasn't chosen to implement the optional provision in Article 80, where the GDPR to allow non-profits and other activist organisations to seek damages for breaches, but we will have a hell of a lot of amendments at committee stage.